Welcome to Kansas Ag Report. I'm Ken Rogers. On this week's program, we talk with Dr. Glynn Tonser, K-State Livestock Economist. He gave an outlook at the recent Risk Profit Conference that took place on campus. We'll also have features from Kansas Corn, Kansas Wheat, and the Kansas Farm Bureau, and the weekly update from the Kansas Livestock Association, and market information from Pinion.
Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by Kansas farmers. Kansas Farm Bureau, a grassroots ag organization representing the state's farm and ranch families since 1919, kfb.org. And the Kansas Wheat Commission, lending in the adoption of profitable innovations from wheat, online at kswheat.com.
In agriculture news, when it comes to the food served at tailgate, K-Staters take the eat beef very seriously. Beef brings more to tailgates. No one knows that like the K-State family. The Kansas Beef Council looks to encourage beef at tailgating this year, sponsoring the Tailgater of the Game competition yet again. For each home game, starting September 2nd against Southeast Missouri, and through November 11th against Baylor, KBC staff and volunteers will be walking around the main tailgating areas, and any tailgate crew that's cooking up beef, whether it be burgers, steaks, or something in between, will have a chance to win. The weekly winner will be chosen at random and then featured during the game with a video played on the big screen. Weekly winners will then win a prize of grilling gear and a gift card. And all those weekly winners will be entered to win the grand prize of box seats at the last home game of the year, Farmageddon, Iowa State. If you'd like more information on Tailgater of the Game, go to kansasbeef.org. Well, strength in farm real estate values persisted for the second quarter, despite some modernization in the farm economy and higher interest rates as well. The Kansas City Federal Reserve says the growth in farmland values eased from a surge in recent years, but did remain strong through the first half of 2023. Broad strength in farm finances during recent years throughout the district continue supporting the ag credit conditions. Margins for many commodities have thinned in recent months alongside elevated production costs and softening prices. Farm loan performance remains historically strong through early this year. Liquidity levels at many ag banks well positioned to meet growth in lending demand that could be on the horizon. Farm income moderated in all participating districts in the second quarter, following almost 2 years of considerable strength. Improvements in farm income waned, according to the Federal Reserve surveys of ag credit condition. Loan demand remains subdued despite those incomes moderating a bit. And most cow-calf operations in the U.S. remain relatively small and have fewer than 50 cows. USDA says at the other end of the spectrum, there are a few operations with more than 1,000 cows. USDA data from the National Ag Statistics Service Ag Census indicates between 1997 and 2017, most cow-calf operations remained small. In 2017, 54% of farms with beef cows had fewer than 20 animals. That was down slightly from 1997, but over those 2 decades, the overall number of cow-calf operations in the U.S. dropped by 19%, and the average herd size, the remaining operation, grew. These changes in farm numbers and herd size, while notable, haven't been as significant as what we've seen in hog and dairy production. The combination of relatively lower cow-calf specific startup costs and pasture as the primary source of feed, resulting in a variety of operation sizes. Stay with us, Dr. Glynn Tonser, when we return.
The Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by Kansas Grain Sorghum, growers working together. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org. Grass and Grain, online or in the mail, keeping Kansas farmers informed for over 60 years. grassandgrain.com.
Our guest is Dr. Glynn Tonser, K-State Livestock Economist. We caught up with him at the Risk Profit Conference in the campus of Kansas State. Well, Dr. Tonser, let's look. It has been a interesting ride in 2023.
Yeah, so cattle market, regardless of weight class, has been above a year ago. Mainly, that's a supply side story. I mean, there's fewer animals in the system, so that supports higher prices as long as beef demand enables it. And we can break it down more than that, and I did at Risk and Profit here, as you said. But it's in that order exactly. As the industry is smaller today than it was a year ago, and beef demand is okay. It's a little weaker than a year ago, but it hasn't fell through the floor by any means. So that's enabled cattle prices across the board. 6 weights, yearlings, feds, you name it, they're all well above last year's numbers.
So are we now back to where the cycle is working the way it should, or all the pandemic situations somewhat ironed out finally?
Well, there's a long tail to the pandemic stuff, and we're not past that as it relates to the consumer. I do think we're past it for the majority of, let's call it, the supply disruptions. So we have kind of regular flow of cattle and beef the way we would want and so forth. Now, the elevated cost of doing that is partly because of the pandemic, right? So it costs more to run a plant, it costs more to raise a calf, and all these kind of things, which again, I belabored. Part of the reason we had 8% inflation was because the cost of production went up across the board. But I think it is noteworthy. I mean, you asked me before we started recording about, box beef. Box beef is up, but not at levels it once was. So it reflects supply is tightening and people are concerned about that. But there's a little bit of, I don't call it a ceiling, but it hasn't went up as much as some might have expected with the supply pullback, because consumers are sending the signal, and this is not just beef, but across all proteins, there is a net affordability concern. The typical U.S. resident is worse off today than they were 2 years ago financially. Their wages haven't kept up with the higher cost of living, is what's underneath that, and that puts some downward pressure on domestic meat demand.
And again, that's why it looks, when you see what the box beef is, yes, we weren't at the record level, say we were a couple of years ago, but the way I see it's ratcheting back up again, when it jumps, it's jumping $1, $1.30, and so on.
Yeah, no, it definitely moves. I don't disagree with that. It's moving from a higher level, so as a percentage, it isn't as big as it once was.
Sure.
But we're also paying, $175 to $185 for fed cattle. So these discussions always go into margins, and make no mistake, across all species, the packer processor margins are definitely different today than they were 2 or 3 years ago. On the cattle side, somebody selling cattle is in a better position today than they were a year ago. On the hog and chicken side, you can't say that. So you got to be very careful making general statements at the moment. Is the middlemen, the packer and processor segment's definitely in the midst of a squeeze across all species. The livestock producer, it depends on which species, if at the moment they're making money or not.
And it seems like that is, as we hear stories of, if there was a lag in, say, pork, poultry's picked up, so on and so forth. And that goes back to some of the consumer, not necessarily confidence, but where the consumer believes they can get the biggest bang to feed their families.
Yeah, and some households are going to make that change and others aren't. So we talked about that in the long version. Households that say their finances are better than a year ago are less in a position where they have to make a change and less willing to make a change because they're less price sensitive. And where that comment's coming from, only about 20% of the public says they're better off than they were a year ago. That means 80% say they're the same or worse. So that other group, that majority, is more likely to entertain a change, either across species or maybe within. So maybe it's from steak to ground beef, right? Or maybe it's from pork chop to sausage or things like that.
We're talking with Dr. Glynn Tonser, a K-State Livestock Economist. We'll come back, talk more in just a moment.
Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by the Kansas Livestock Association, supporting members' business interests and meeting consumer demands. KLA.org. Oldie Seed Farms, carrying soil-specific seed. Find them on the web at oldieseed.com. That's OHLDE seed.com. And Kansas Corn, building the future at kansascorn.com.
Dr. Glynn Tonser is a K-State Livestock Economist joining us, and Dr. Tonser, as we saw with 1st of June that biannual report of inventory, one of the things that kind of jumped out is we're not necessarily retaining a lot of heifers, but it may be a little bit of possibly seeing expansion. I know I'm kind of parsing my words here, but where are we at in the cattle cycle? Are we going to be
because maybe summer wasn't quite as bad as what we had thought with some forced culling or selling? Where are you seeing things?
So the projected margins for a cow-calf operator look really good for 24 and probably 2025. And historically, that large economic carrot is the trigger for expansion. I interjected historically because I don't know if we can use past rules of thumb anymore, because it's been a unique experience for several years. Mother Nature has a lot to do with the physical ability, right, to rebuild and expand the herd. But my thesis, what I shared with our audience here, was if those projected margins stayed north of $300 per cow in 2024, which is certainly the case today, it's more like 500 is the current projection, and you're in an area where Mother Nature allows you to expand and it fits your business plan, notice that add up, then I definitely think we will. I think there's operations, for example, in Kansas that Mother Nature forced them to shrink by 5 to 25%. There's some more extreme versions of that. The first decision is, do I rebuild where I was? That's an easier decision because you're spreading fixed costs back across the number of cows you planned on. And I think we're already to the point operations will do that to the extent that Mother Nature allows them. But the next decision, do I have a net gain or net grow of my operation, is a little more challenging, because do you have the infrastructure? Do you have the land for it? Do you have the financial appetite for elevated volatility and higher borrowing costs and everything that's part of that? I don't think that latter is a no-brainer yes for all operations.
Okay. Then one thing we want to wrap up on is we're seeing where we are with cash sales. And maybe they're still at a decent price. Many think maybe we should be a little stronger, or it seems like the last few weeks we've been very lagging in making big sales. And it seems to be a different correlation where we are on the board, on the futures market. Can you maybe explain that? Should we be in this kind of different trajectory?
Are you referring to fed cattle?
Fed cattle, yes.
Yeah. So, we have both discussions, fed and feeder, but on finished market-ready cattle, that is definitely a discussion. I think the biggest unknown at the moment there is exactly how tight those, not the supplies in the next 3 or 4 months. We know what that is in the yard, but subsequently after that. What's Mother Nature done to forced sales of feeder cattle and what that does to the throughput? You've got that going on. And there definitely is a lot of chatter on what is the basis relationship, my local market relative to the single CME contract. But I would encourage everybody watching this to say that is not new. We've always had different basis patterns, north and south and so forth, and it's just part of an ongoing discussion.
Okay. And folks can find out a lot of those things we've talked about, and you put a lot of stuff on agmanager.info, correct?
Yes, agmanager.info. Go to the contributors tab. You find us by name. My last name's Tonser, and you can find all this information.
There's a lot of things also that you do, a lot of numbers if folks want to try to dig all that as well. Yep. Good to see you, as always. Thanks.
Thanks for having me on, Ken.
Dr. Glynn Tonser, K-State Livestock Economist, has joined us. We'll have more coming up in just a moment.
Premier Farm & Home has what you need to make your lawn the best in the neighborhood.
Hi, I'm Ken. We choose Premier Farm & Home for the professional look that we do ourselves.
Feel free to stop in. You can also visit our website at heycow.com.
Hi, I'm Bill Johnston with Kansas Corn, and today I'm right down the road from my house at Double T Herefords. If you're watching this video right now, it's probably because you have looked at the fermentation in a bag experiment provided by Kansas Corn. Well, here at Double T, they're a diversified farming operation that raises crops, sheep, commercial beef cattle, and registered Hereford bulls. But they also practice fermentation in a bag. What you're viewing is the last 75 feet of a silage bag that was 450 feet long and contained over 700 tons of corn silage. What is silage, you ask? Silage is a process where the farmer chops the entire above the ground portion of corn, the stalk, the leaves, the grain, and all, at around 50 to 70% moisture. They then chop this up, blow it into this bag, and store it, and fermentation begins. Fermentation is an anaerobic process that converts sugars into organic acids. lactic acid, and acetic acid, and a few others. The farmer will also use an inoculant that has a lactic acid producing bacteria in it to treat this silage to speed up that process. Those acids will help to preserve this corn in the fermentation process and make it a stable, consistent product. Double T likes to use wet distiller's grain to mix with their silage to make a complete ration balanced with the right amount of protein and energy for their cattle. Wet distiller's grain is a byproduct of making ethanol. The silage is a little over 6% protein. The wet distiller's grain is approximately 9% protein. When mixed in the right amount, they'll develop a complete protein ration packed with the right amount of protein and energy to feed their cattle. Right now they are adding the wet distiller's grain. And here you can see all the feed ingredients being blended together. Many of you have probably noticed these upright silos that scatter the countryside that are one of the more common ways of storing silage. Blake has done the calculations, and he knows with the number of cows in here how much of this silage he has to put out to provide them with enough feed for the day. And as we've said earlier, it's been balanced for all these cows' nutritional needs. Hopefully by watching this video, you understand a little more about fermentation in a bag here on the farm. In this lesson, we've provided links to some additional videos that will teach you more about the silage chopping process. So enjoy the lesson. Have a good day.
Grain sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org.
Continuous wheat and fallow wheat are two different crops. That statement was made at a resolution session of the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers last fall from Northwest Kansas wheat farmer Chris Tanner, who serves as COG Vice President. As two different crops, they should be able to be insured separately. He said, farmers currently don't have the option to insure wheat enterprise units by fallow and continuous separately and must combine them. COG added a resolution stating, the COG supports efforts to improve crop insurance performance for farmers through the separation of enterprise units by fallow and continuous, while still offering combined units to those who still benefit. This resolution was then approved by COG membership and presented to the National Association of Wheat Growers. U.S. Senators Roger Marshall and Michael Bennet introduced legislation that will allow farmers to insure wheat enterprise units by fallow and continuous, while still offering a combined option. According to COG President Kyler Miller-Shasky, making the change to be able to separate the two cropping styles would be a great benefit of wheat farmers by allowing them to protect their crops and operations effectively, giving them more confidence in their business decisions, and bringing an important tool, crop insurance. According to COG President Kyler Miller-Shasky, making the change to be able to separate the two cropping styles would be a great benefit to wheat farmers by allowing them to protect their crops and operations effectively, giving them more confidence in their business decisions, and bringing an important tool, crop insurance, up to date with modern farming practices.
Farmers are always there for each other. We shed tears together, we celebrate together, but we also grow together. Farm Bureau's meant so much to me and my family. My dad encouraged me early on when I was a young farmer, complaining about problems on the farm. He said, son, if you want to make a difference in that area, you got to get outside your fence rows. So he took me to a Farm Bureau meeting, and I became part of the Young Farmer program. It taught me leadership development. It taught me how to speak up and be heard, and that's what we do best at Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau is the largest general farm organization in the country. We're made up of 50 state farm bureaus in Puerto Rico. And in those states, we have the most powerful part of our organization, and that's the grassroots, the farmers and ranchers that actually produce the food and fiber for this country. Almost 6 million members strong. So they're our great partners, and they're the ones that develop our policy. Our policy sprouts up out of the county farm bureaus where our power and strength is, and comes through the process that gives us a roadmap for each year that we work for them in Washington, D.C., at our state capitals, and even at local governments. Yeah, there's something really special about the bond between the Farm Bureau members. You know, I've been part of a lot of organizations in my lifetime, but no organization has the same family feel that Farm Bureau does. Farmers are always there for each other, whether it be cleaning up after a storm or whether it's delivering hay to a drought-stricken area. It truly is a family. I just lost my loving wife. And the outpouring of love from this country and the farmers and ranchers was overwhelming to me and my family. Never will forget that. And that's what we do at the county level, state level. We come to the rescue of our neighbors and our friends and family, especially in agriculture. We are a powerful voice for the American farmer, and we do it every day while they're out back on their farms working. We have the farmers back. If you're a farmer and you're not a member, we would welcome you into our Farm Bureau family. And if you want to know more about agriculture, come be part of this great family. I think you'll enjoy learning what our farmers and ranchers do for you and your families each and every day.
Imagine having someone help you pick the best corn hybrids for every field on your farm. Your Oldie representative can combine your data with his data to offer a field-by-field prescription. Contact Oldie Seed today at 877-692-4555.
Producers and landowners who install enduring conservation practices may qualify to receive financial assistance through a voluntary state cost share program designed to encourage the improvement of water quality and quantity across the state. Funding is provided by the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Conservation through appropriation from the State Water Plan Fund. The cost share program is administered by conservation districts across the state. Along with the annual funding, additional money is available for fiscal year 2024 to landowners and producers interested in implementing eligible practices such as irrigation management, nutrient management, planting cover crops, managing livestock water supplies, cross fencing, and abandoned well plugging. Those accepted for the program will be notified of the practice or practices approved and the estimated amount of cost share to be provided. Projects started or completed prior to being approved for funding by individual districts and the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Conservation are not eligible for these funds. To apply for cost share funds or for more information on the program, contact your local conservation district. A district directory can be found at agriculture.ks.gov.
Mitch Dewar here with Pinion Risk Management. New lows. On August 15th, December corn futures broke through the previous low of 481 and traded all the way down to 473 3/4. Those are prices that we haven't traded since 2020. A week ago Friday, the USDA released the August supply and demand report. The most anticipated numbers in this report were what the USDA would print for yield for corn and soybeans. In the August report, corn yield was dropped 2 bushels per acre from July's USDA report to 175.5, which was just below the pre-report estimate of 175.5. In soybeans, a 50.9 bushel per acre was printed versus a 52 bushel per acre print in July, and also 0.4 bushels per acre under the trade estimate. With the drop in yields from July, the total production numbers also were decreased for both corn and beans. The futures markets couldn't hold on to positive gains throughout the day on the report, and both closed in the negative. This next week we will get a better idea of what is in the field as the Pro Farmer Tour starts on Monday. The cattle market as a whole has continued to be very strong. Futures markets have moved to more of a sideways trade rather than a trending upward pattern. Live cattle slaughter is running 30 to 40,000 head per week below last year's levels. You can reach us at 888-452-8751. I'm Mitch Dewar with Pinion Risk Management.
That's our show this week. Be social with us online, KansasAgReport.net, or on our social media pages. Coming up next week, we'll preview the Kansas State Fair with Executive Director Brian Schultz. I'm Ken Rogers. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on the Kansas Ag Report.
Kansas Corn reminds you that E15 fuel is the right choice for every kind of driver. For the car enthusiast, E15 has higher octane. For the thrifty driver, E15 is priced lower than regular unleaded. For the nature lover, E15 provides cleaner air. For the shopper who buys local, E15 has more ethanol from our Kansas corn farms. Choose E15 for a higher octane, lower price, cleaner American fuel. Message from the Kansas Corn Commission. Learn more at kscorn.com.
Sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org.